They didn't issue a warning. They didn't hold a press conference. Jeep just cracked. In a matter of weeks, one of America's most legendary automakers began unraveling, and no one outside the boardroom saw it coming. We're not talking about a bad quarter. We're talking about a 42% collapse in stock value, factories shutting their doors, and a silence spreading across dealership lots like a ghost town at high noon. This wasn't a stumble. This was a systemic failure. So what detonated this collapse? Was it greed? Was it arrogance? Or was it something deeper? Something buried in the strategy long before the numbers fell apart? What's happening? Inside Stellantis headquarters, the mood was confident just months earlier. Executives believed they had a winning strategy: elevate Jeep's image, move into premium price territory, and increase margins on every unit sold. It was the kind of logic that looked perfect on spreadsheets and PowerPoint decks, but it was divorced from the reality of what Jeep meant to the people who actually drove them. The Grand Wagoneer became the symbol of this shift, a hulking tech-stuffed luxury SUV that wore the Jeep badge but asked for a price tag north of $100,000 for a brand that had once prided itself on utility, durability, and adventure. This was a sharp turn into unfamiliar territory. Stellantis believed that by mimicking Cadillac or Range Rover, they could position Jeep as an American premium brand. Then came the Gladiator Rubicon. Once hailed as the return of the rugged Jeep truck, its 2024 model now came with a manufacturer's suggested retail price, pushing $70,000, and that was before taxes, fees, or optional upgrades. Even the supposedly affordable base trims, like the Sport S, started at over $55,000. The brand that once sold the idea of freedom on four wheels was now selling exclusivity and pricing out the very people who had kept it alive through decades of loyalty. Behind these decisions was a European-led boardroom, trying to force Jeep into a new market segment it had no business chasing. The logic? Luxury brands have higher profit margins, but this wasn't about margins. This was about misunderstanding what Jeep meant to Americans. It was about executives who thought a leather-wrapped steering wheel and touchscreen package could justify turning a working-class vehicle into a luxury symbol. An anonymous Stellantis executive reportedly told a French business outlet, "We're elevating Jeep to where it belongs." But in practice, they weren't elevating anything. They were alienating their most loyal customers while failing to attract new ones. The brand's rugged charm had been turned into a showroom illusion. "We thought we were elevating the brand," one former marketing strategist later admitted. "We were pricing it to death." But the public reaction would shatter their illusion. Graveyards on the lot. The silence on dealership lots was louder than any engine. As Jeep's pricing strategy spiraled out of touch, the effects were most painfully felt at ground level, by dealers. In cities, suburbs, and rural towns across America, Jeep dealerships became unintentional symbols of the crisis. Massive lots once bustling with turnover now looked like post-apocalyptic staging grounds. Flags still waved, balloons still floated, but foot traffic dried up. Rows of unsold Gladiators and Grand Cherokees sat baking in the sun. Incentives were pushed hard, zero down. Low APR, extended warranties, but even the discounts couldn't move metal. Dealers were pleading with Stellantis to stop sending inventory, but the pipeline kept flowing. One dealer in Ohio put it bluntly, "We're begging for incentives, but even that's not working." Customers take one look at the price tag and head to Ford. The problem wasn't just psychological. Unsold inventory came with real financial pressure. Dealers pay interest on the vehicles sitting on their lots. As inventory ballooned, so did carrying costs. The longer a Jeep sat, the more it cost the dealer, even if it never sold. Sales managers juggled spreadsheets and balance sheets, trying to figure out how to move inventory without hemorrhaging cash. Sales teams became demoralized. One former finance manager said he hadn't seen numbers this bad since the 2008 crash. The vehicles that had once symbolized American freedom were now stuck, unmoving. The inventory wasn't just metal, it was weight, emotional, financial, symbolic. And with nowhere to put the unsold Jeeps, the cracks at the retail level were widening into full structural collapse. And when the lots filled up, the layoffs began. This isn't guesswork. We analyzed investor calls, insider leaks, and global auto trends to expose what Jeep won't tell you. So subscribe and stay ahead of the collapse. From assembly to unemployment. 400 workers didn't just lose jobs, they lost faith. The Detroit River Yard plant was among the first to feel it. Production shifts were quietly trimmed back. Then came the notices. One round of layoffs, then another. By the time the final tally was in, over 400 employees were out. The numbers were devastating, but the emotional toll ran deeper. Workers lost paychecks and futures. Generations of families had built careers at Jeep's assembly lines. Fathers trained sons. Daughters followed mothers into skilled trades. Entire neighborhoods were woven into the rhythm of Jeep's production schedule. The job wasn't just a job, it was identity. And then, without warning, that rhythm stopped. "I gave 30 years to this company," one former line worker said. "Now I've got nothing but a cardboard box and a severance check that won't last 3 months. His voice cracked as he pointed to his Jeep hat. "They used to say we were the heart of the company. Now we're just another line item they cut to make the board happy." The layoffs didn't stay contained to the factory floor. Local suppliers, sandwich shops, auto parts stores, and transport services all felt the ripple. Small towns that had once thrived on Jeep's payroll were now struggling to survive. Some dealerships even reported lower traffic because laid-off workers stopped coming in. No more service appointments, no more trades, no more upgrades. What was once a self-sustaining ecosystem, worker builds the car, dealer sells it, buyer drives it, was now a chain with multiple links snapped. But this wasn't just about jobs, it was about betrayal. Jeep wasn't just collapsing financially, it was collapsing spiritually, losing not just buyers, but believers. Jeep's identity crisis. For most of its life, Jeep didn't need to try to impress anyone. It simply was. It stood as a symbol of American resilience, a badge of utilitarian pride. From the beaches of Normandy to the rocky passes of Moab, the brand carved out its place in history by doing one thing exceptionally well: building rugged, go-anywhere vehicles that could take a beating and keep going. The original Willys Jeep was a war machine, not a fashion statement. Even decades later, models like the Cherokee and Wrangler never apologized for their rough edges. They wore them like armor. But somewhere along the way, that authenticity got traded in for polish. In recent years, Jeep has tried to reinvent itself as something it never needed to be: luxurious. The pivot wasn't subtle. Leather-wrapped dashboards, panoramic sunroofs, ambient lighting with over 30 color options. Jeep began packing in features typically reserved for German sedans and luxury SUVs. The mission shifted from capability to comfort, from performance to prestige. It's no longer about fording rivers, it's about syncing your Apple CarPlay. And consumers noticed. Longtime fans, those who bled Jeep green, felt it first. These weren't casual buyers, they were brand evangelists who had driven Wranglers through mud pits and Cherokees through snowdrifts. Now they were stepping into showrooms and asking, "What happened?" Instead of rugged knobs and roll bars, they found touchscreens and quilted seats. The shift felt less like evolution and more like betrayal. One lifelong owner summed it up perfectly. "This isn't what Jeep means to me. This is just another overpriced crossover with a Jeep badge slapped on it." Jeep's DNA didn't just get diluted, it got rewritten. The brand that once promised freedom and fearlessness now sells polish and presentation. And with every Grand Wagoneer that rolls off the line priced over $100,000, the message gets clearer. Jeep isn't for them anymore. It's for someone else. Someone wealthier. Someone softer. But loyalists didn't sit quietly, and that gap triggered a mass exodus. The buyers who walked away. It wasn't just longtime Jeep fans who were walking away. It was new buyers too, especially younger ones. Gen Z and millennial shoppers who once saw Jeep as aspirational and authentic began looking elsewhere. They weren't turned off by the idea of buying a Jeep. They were turned off by what Jeep had become. For this group, image matters. But it's not about badges or brand history. It's about purpose, value, and personal alignment. And Jeep's current offerings failed all three. Where once the Jeep badge represented freedom and rebellion, it now looked bloated and confused. Social media didn't help. YouTube reviewers, TikTok influencers, and car bloggers began poking fun at Jeep's luxury pivot. Clips showing glitchy infotainment systems, rattling trim pieces, and clunky handling became viral fodder. Meanwhile, competitors were quietly winning the hearts of younger drivers. Subaru's Outback and Toyota's RAV4 offered reliability, capability, and a clear identity, without pretending to be something they weren't. Ford's Bronco came roaring back with style, off-road chops, and the same kind of lifestyle narrative that Jeep had long since abandoned. It wasn't just a vehicle, it was a movement. The very thing Jeep used to be. In online forums, the conversations were brutal. I wanted to love it, but it's just not worth the price. Everything feels fake now. Jeep's lost its soul. These weren't just opinions. They were purchase decisions being made in real time. And every time one of those buyers chose a Bronco or a Subaru instead, Jeep lost more than a sale. It lost a future customer. And while Jeep fought its past, the present was falling apart. And the boardroom confidence? It didn't last. Because as Jeep's identity blurred, its financials began to crack. But investors weren't buying the excuses anymore. Collapse on Wall Street. The reckoning came swiftly and publicly. Over the course of 6 months, Stellantis stock fell by 42%, a gut punch to investors, analysts, and stakeholders across the board. It wasn't just a sign of Jeep's distress. It was a flashing red siren that something inside the corporation had gone deeply wrong, and Wall Street responded with brutal efficiency. At first, the warnings were subtle, small dips in share price, minor downgrades by analysts. But by the second quarter, the market could no longer ignore what was happening. Jeep's dismal sales figures had become too large to conceal. The Gladiator's 21% drop, coupled with sliding numbers for both the Wrangler and Grand Cherokee, painted a picture of demand collapse. Dealerships were drowning in unsold stock. Consumer interest was waning, and unlike tech or biotech stocks that trade on potential, auto companies trade on hard math. Vehicles sold, margins secured, pipelines cleared. Financial news outlets pounced. Articles with headlines like "Stellantis on the brink" and "Jeep's brand identity crisis goes nuclear" flooded investment newsletters and automotive media. Investment banks released revised outlooks. Some downgraded Stellantis to underperform. Others called for a leadership shakeup. The sell-off accelerated. What made it worse was Stellantis's lack of a coherent response. Quarterly earnings calls were filled with vague assurances, mentions of temporary misalignment, and promises that pricing corrections were being evaluated. But there was no bold plan, no dramatic pivot, no show of urgency. Investors weren't just nervous, they were insulted. The company's statements felt like misdirection, not transparency. One hedge fund manager summed it up in a CNBC interview. "You don't need to be an analyst to see the problem here. You just need to walk onto a Jeep lot and count how many cars aren't moving." That raw observational truth undercut any attempt by Stellantis executives to control the narrative. The reality was visible on the ground, and the market was reacting accordingly. This wasn't just poor performance, it was a confidence crisis, one that shook Jeep's foundations far more deeply than a dip in quarterly earnings ever could. And soon, even Jeep's own people couldn't defend it. America's toughest brand turns fragile. Jeep was once the symbol of American grit. It stormed beaches in World War II, climbed mountain trails, and roared across deserts. But in the span of just a few years, the brand that defined resilience became a punchline. And the collapse wasn't just financial or operational, it was cultural. Across social media, a new wave of criticism took hold. Jeep was no longer being praised for its toughness. It was being mocked for trying to be something it wasn't. Memes comparing the Grand Wagoneer to a Louis Vuitton purse on wheels circulated widely. Comments about the price of a Gladiator sounding like a BMW but driving like a farm truck became viral soundbites. And that cultural mockery hit Jeep where it hurt most, its identity. Mainstream outlets picked up on the sentiment. Jeep's identity crisis made headlines in the Wall Street Journal, Motor Trend, and Bloomberg. Even longtime allies in the auto press began questioning whether Jeep had lost its way. Reviewers noted luxury interiors, but asked why no one seemed to want them. They praised powertrains, but then lamented price tags. One commentator summed it up perfectly. Jeep tried to become a Range Rover without earning the respect, and the results are tragic. And that's when the competitor arrived. Not just any competitor, but one designed specifically to reclaim what Jeep had abandoned. And just as Jeep lost its footing, another competitor stepped in. The electric reckoning. The electric vehicle revolution didn't just arrive, it came like a tidal wave. And while other automakers braced for impact, Jeep stood there with an umbrella. The EV race left Jeep coughing in the dust. By the time they finally rolled out the Wrangler 4X, the conversation had already moved on. What should have been a triumphant step into the future turned out to be an overpriced, underwhelming half measure. It wasn't fully electric, it wasn't fully convincing, and it certainly wasn't priced to compete. The Wrangler 4X's hybrid system was touted as innovative, but to buyers expecting a bold electric vision, it felt like a compromise wrapped in nostalgia. While other manufacturers leaned into efficiency and modernity, Jeep clung tightly to tradition. The result? A plug-in hybrid that cost more than $55,000 and didn't deliver the range or value that modern EV buyers demand. Consumers didn't just hesitate, they laughed. Online forums filled with sarcastic takes on Jeep's electric future. Social media turned what should have been a brand milestone into a meme. Instead of leading the charge, Jeep became a punchline. Meanwhile, the competition didn't wait. Ford's electric Mustang Mach-E and the F-150 Lightning undercut Jeep on pricing, performance, and perception. Tesla continued its dominance with the Model Y, offering better range and technology at lower cost. Even newcomers like Rivian and international brands like BYD started rolling out electric SUVs and pickups that made the Wrangler 4xe feel instantly dated. Jeep's late, lukewarm entry into the EV market positioned them not as a challenger, but as a follower. And followers do not survive revolutions. The most damaging part wasn't just the product, it was the message. Jeep told the world it was evolving, but what consumers saw was a brand still stuck in the past. There was no clear EV roadmap, no bold announcement of a fully electric Wrangler, no affordable electric option for first-time buyers. While other companies offered timelines, concept models, and dedicated EV platforms, Jeep gave buyers a hybrid with a plug and hoped it would be enough. The problem is, Jeep's audience is changing. Younger buyers want sustainability, tech integration, and efficiency, but they still want adventure. Jeep could have built that future. Instead, they built a bridge that doesn't reach the other side. And while they stalled, a bigger problem was forming just beyond America's borders. But globally, the situation was about to get even worse. The global pivot Jeep ignored. While the world shifted, Jeep stayed stuck in neutral. Across Europe and Asia, the auto industry wasn't just embracing electrification, it was rewriting the rules. Countries were setting aggressive targets to phase out internal combustion engines. Cities were imposing emissions restrictions. Buyers were prioritizing efficiency and eco-conscious brands. And through it all, Jeep kept pushing oversized gasoline SUVs as if the global market hadn't changed. Jeep's failure to adapt internationally didn't come from a lack of demand. In fact, markets like India, China, and much of Western Europe are experiencing SUV booms, but with a twist. Buyers want smaller, smarter, cleaner vehicles. They want urban-friendly dimensions with rugged credibility, not hulking metal beasts that drink fuel and strain wallets. Jeep's strategy, however, leaned almost entirely on its U.S. portfolio. Big Wranglers, big Cherokees, and big problems. The brand's attempt to export this playbook overseas fell flat. What works in Wyoming doesn't always work in Warsaw. In Europe, Jeep faced particularly stiff resistance. Fuel prices are significantly higher, emissions regulations are tighter, and competition is brutal. Brands like Peugeot, Volkswagen, Hyundai, and Toyota have been flooding the market with efficient hybrid and electric crossovers. Meanwhile, Jeep's European sales struggled under the weight of import costs, regulatory burdens, and a product line that looked increasingly tone-deaf to local needs. In markets like Germany and the United Kingdom, buyers flocked to PHEVs with actual electric range, not hybrids that struggled to justify their emissions benefits. Asia was no kinder. In China, the world's largest car market, Jeep's presence has all but evaporated. Stellantis announced that it was withdrawing from joint ventures in China after years of stagnation and failure to meet demand. In India, another key growth market, Jeep has faced criticism over its pricing and after-sales service, two make-or-break factors in an increasingly competitive environment. Everywhere Jeep looked, other automakers had already arrived, with better timing, better pricing, and better adaptation. Worse still, Jeep's global brand message was incoherent. Was it a rugged off-roader? A luxury SUV maker? An American heritage brand? or a new age tech innovator? The answer changed depending on the market. And when brands lose narrative control, they lose market confidence. While Toyota leaned into consistency, Ford adapted aggressively, and Hyundai rebranded itself around tech-forward design, Jeep seemed to be improvising. And improvisation doesn't scale. And back in America, a ghost from Jeep's past was rising. The Bronco took back the mountain. What Jeep forgot, Ford remembered. The rebirth of the Bronco wasn't just a product launch, it was a reclamation. Ford reached into the past, pulled out a legend, and gave it new life with surgical precision. It wasn't just about building a competitor to the Wrangler. It was about rebuilding a lifestyle, one that Jeep had let slip away. The new Bronco struck every nerve Jeep used to own. Boxy design, removable doors, trail-tested hardware. But Ford added something Jeep hadn't in years: modernity. The Bronco came with off-road maps, digital trail navigation, modular bumpers, and an interior that felt both rugged and tech-savvy. It wasn't trying to be a luxury SUV, it was trying to be a better Jeep. And for many buyers it was. Jeep enthusiasts noticed immediately. The Bronco didn't just look the part, it felt intentional. Ford's marketing team went after Jeep's audience directly. Comparisons, call-outs, challenge events. Off-road YouTubers and Instagram influencers jumped ship almost overnight. The Bronco wasn't trying to be everything for everyone. It was just trying to be great at one thing. And that focus cut deep. While Jeep struggled with its identity, Ford leaned in. Bronco owners were encouraged to explore, customize, and connect. Jeep events started seeing more Broncos. Forums that once echoed with Jeep loyalty were now debating which Bronco trim was best. Brand surveys began reflecting the shift. Younger buyers, first-time adventurers, and even some seasoned off-roaders were choosing the Bronco not just as an alternative, but as an upgrade. The worst part, Jeep had no real response. The Gladiator wasn't the answer. The Grand Wagoneer certainly wasn't. The Wrangler had been left to age, facelifted and repackaged, but never reimagined. Bronco was a storm Jeep never saw coming, and by the time they did, it had already reached the summit, and now Jeep was out of time and out of room to run. Jeep's last shot at redemption. It's not about recovery, it's about survival. At this stage, Jeep isn't facing a rebranding challenge, it's facing an extinction threat. What happens next will determine whether the company claws its way back, or fades into the history books next to Plymouth, Oldsmobile, and Pontiac. First, Stellantis must acknowledge what it broke. Jeep's identity has been stretched, blurred, and in many cases abandoned. That must end. The brand must return to its roots, not in style, but in spirit. Jeep can still be modern, it can still evolve, but it must speak with one voice. Rugged, capable, and real. No more luxury posturing. No more pricing vehicles like Mercedes without delivering the same value. That means developing a real electric strategy, not half measures, not a plug-in Wrangler with 10 miles of range. A full EV platform, a bold vision, an affordable off-road EV that proves Jeep is serious about the future, not just decorating it with charging ports. The 4xe was a prototype. Now it's time for the real deal. Next, Jeep must rebuild its bridges. Dealers, once overloaded and ignored, must become partners again. Incentives need to be thoughtful, not desperate. Product planning should be tied to consumer demand, not shareholder expectations. A leaner lineup, better inventory management, and regional flexibility will go a long way in stabilizing the brand's domestic presence. On the consumer side, Jeep must re-earn loyalty, not assume it. That means direct community engagement, trail events, loyalty programs, conservation partnerships, even off-road certification programs for customers. Turn customers into brand advocates again. Make them feel part of something, not sold to, but included. Globally, Jeep needs to stop guessing and start listening. Tailored models for Europe and Asia, priced correctly and engineered for the market, are long overdue. Build trust region by region. It won't happen overnight, but it can happen with the right focus and humility. Ultimately, Stellantis has to decide if Jeep is a commodity or a culture. Because if they treat it like just another brand to be milked for margins, the market will move on. The Bronco has proven that buyers are still hungry for what Jeep once stood for, but they won't wait forever. Jeep stood for grit, for freedom, for the American road, but today it's stalled, cornered by its own decisions. What would it take for you to trust Jeep again? Or has the trail gone cold for good? Drop your thoughts in the comments, and if you want the truth no one else is showing, subscribe.